Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla, let's go over the market, let's talk about what is happening with this stock and well, what we can expect as usual moving forward. So with all that being said and done, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button as it does help a lot. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, my membership section on YouTube is live. The link is down below if you're interested for just $2.99 a month. You get access to all my updates, posts, thoughts, just technical analysis, constantly on Tesla every single day as the market's open, live, as it's trading, options flow, and sometimes other stocks as well. So if you're interested, the link is down in the description below. We would love to have you. But let's just get right into it. Tesla closing the day down. At this point, it just feels like every single day is down, right? But again, down another 4.5%, which is pretty sizable. Just when you thought things can't get any worse, they absolutely find a way to. Down 4.5%, closing at pretty much $169.50, just shy of $169.69. Nice. With the market obviously being down, at least QQQ down about 0.77%. So yet another pretty unsurprising underperformance by Tesla. One of which the main reasons is, of course, well, there was a pretty substantial, about a 33 or so % downgrade in price target on Tesla from this analyst right here from Wells Fargo. And this was definitely one of the main pieces driving us out of this congestion zone and, well, down even further. It is what it is, right? That's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. Now, you know, again, this shouldn't come to anyone as much of a surprise. We talked about how Tesla overall does look weak, right? How, you know, we are consolidating. It'll pick one of the directions, but ultimately, you know, there are some decent signs setting up, but, you know, no real bottom signals yet. And overall, the stock is still very much weak. It's still absolutely in a downtrend. There's absolutely no questioning that, I think, whatsoever, really. You have to be delusional to think it's in an uptrend here. It's absolutely in a downtrend, right? However, with that being said, there is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, or at least a potential light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, we'll see if that actually comes to fruition or not, but let's talk about that. So let's talk about the positive for now. There's so much negativity. Let's just bring in some positivity first. Let's talk about the potential bullish aspects, if you will, for the stock and the technical analysis of the stock here, right? So you know, we are approaching, like I said many times, the 160s, right? The low 170s to high 160s I've been talking about for quite some time, and we're exactly right at dead smack in the middle of that range right now, pretty much at 169.5. As you can see, if I zoom out right here, right, we are, of course, at the bottom of this channel now, right? We bounced off of this channel many times, and we did so back here, right, where we kind of bounced once off the post earnings, and then we came back down, right? And then we bounced once again, and you know, created that overall, you know, ultimate bear flag. And now it obviously crashed back down, and we're once again at that same support channel that we've bounced several times. Will this time be different? Who knows, right? No one knows for sure. But in theory, this is an area of demand. At least it should be, right? As it could even be from this level right here that we close at, like this 169-ish level. This could be that. Could go a little bit lower to about, you know, 165 or so. That is also a possibility, right? Can go as low as that for sure. But also really depends on when. For instance, you know, one thing we can see happen is we can see Tesla, you know, maybe from around this area, get a little bit of a bounce. Maybe it comes back up to retest the 175 area, you know, very common to do. Kind of like when we broke below these levels back here, we came back up to retest them, right? Same concept, right? Maybe come back to retest the 175 area, maybe even by Friday. Not impossible, but you know, I'd be surprised if we break out of it. But then from there, we can reject, make our way down even further to about 165, or it really depends on when it even happens. We can even go a little bit lower. We can even potentially go close to the 150s, if not slightly enter the 150s if it happens pretty much towards the end of the month. That is not an impossible scenario. But the one thing to note that is kind of interesting is the fact that we are in a bit of a descending wedge, right? If you take into account this bottom channel that I'm talking about right now, and these kind of double red lines right here, which is acting as a resistance, and that those two essentially, you know, resistance and supports are forming a descending wedge, which usually, obviously, while you're within it, it's bearish because you're obviously trending to down, you know, bottom right, right? You're going down into the right. However, kind of like a bear flag, where it's not, you know, bear flags aren't guaranteed to break to the downside. It's just is a higher chance it will. These descending wedges that we're currently in with those, you know, resistance and that support line I just talked about, the red and the kind of see-through one, right, more often than not do break to the upside. So again, to go back to the example, right, there is a possibility that we do something like this, you know, maybe from just this general area we get a bit of a bounce, go up to 175, not impossible, probably reject, potentially come down even lower to 165, maybe even enter the 150s briefly, not impossible. But there is a chance that we find support around this area, we get very tight on this wedge, and ultimately break out to the upside. and maybe come back up to the 190s to 200 levels. That is not an entirely impossible situation, right? I'm not saying it'll happen, of course, but that is something you have to consider. I don't care if you're a bull. I don't care if you're a bear. I don't care if you think it's going to $69 or $369. I could not care less. That is what I'm seeing, and that is what I'm saying, right? Obviously, things can fall apart. It doesn't mean it has to break out to the upside, just like a bear wedge or a bear channel or bear wedge, bear flag, whatever. It doesn't have to break to the downside. It just doesn't have to break to the upside. This can still collapse. This can still lose these critical support areas down here and go down even further. That is a possibility. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But just using statistics and just using just typical support demand areas and potentially resistance areas as well with the top one up here, you make your own conclusion and you follow your own risk versus reward scenario, if that makes sense, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing. Now, the one thing that's not great is the fact that we are dropping from this congestion period, which did go down in volume. We are dropping on, a pretty bearish looking candle, right? Closing pretty much at the bottom of the day or the lows of the day on slightly elevated volume. Not ideal. This tiny potential bullish divergence we had right here fell apart entirely. However, with that being said, we do still have the larger bullish divergence where, again, as we're coming down and making lower lows, the RSI is still overall making higher lows, right? As the current low right now where we are, the RSI is only at what is this? About 31, we'll say, when we were trading all the way up here at the 180s, we were at 17. So, we're still setting up a bullish divergence on the RSI. Doesn't mean it has to play out right now. Again, especially on a daily time frame, bullish divergences take a while to play out. We also have a weekly bullish divergence, though I'm not gonna lie, this one is starting to look not good. It's starting to lose its foundations, I guess you can say, right? Where, if we start breaching and making a lower low on this RSI, which we're very close to doing so, it will fall apart. So Tesla would pretty much need to bounce right here, right now, in order for it to have a chance to actually have a weekly bullish divergence. But I'm not going to lie, it's not looking as pretty on the weekly, right? So the weekly is not looking great, but the daily still has the potential for it. So, there is that potential. Now, let's talk about to the downside, right? Like, what's the bearish case? Well, the bearish cases are pretty obvious, right? Like I said many times, we were in this congestion period. We were rejected by severe, the volume profile here, by severe increase in volume. It was acting as a resistance. We kept getting pushed back down, like I talked about many times. And so far, we're following through on that, right? We're obviously following through on that. We're constantly making lower lows, obviously a bearish pattern. MACD is still cross bearish, even though it has a bullish divergence. It's still crossed bearish, not ideal, right? We're pretty much breaking every single support level. This 180, broken. 175, broken. Like, we're just constantly just flushing down every meaningful support, and we are approaching yet another potentially huge one, like a major support level. Again, like I said, this 160s-ish area to really could be even as low as the 150s, depending on when it happens or when we actually come down into it, right? But this should be a massive support. I also have two lines right here you can see that acted as a potential massive support area as well, where we had candles right here that bounced right over here, acted as a resistance, acted as a support, right? And we have another one down here, pretty much almost dead smack 150. These two levels right below are also crucial. So again, it wouldn't surprise me if Tesla, it could just melt down right into it right away, but it wouldn't surprise me if we, maybe a little bit lower tomorrow, but ultimately bounce up to 175 and then ultimately come down and make one fresh lower low, which coincides with, again, the channel and the 150s and potentially get a bounce from there. That would not shock me, but again, we'll take it level by level and day by day. But again, if the point I'm trying to make here is if we start losing these levels as well, if we start losing like the 150, this like 165-ish level, this 150s level, if we start breaching below these levels as well, which again, it is a possibility. I'm not saying it's not. The weekly chart looks absolutely hideous. Other than the fact that we're at a support level, ultimately just structure-wise, it looks atrocious. We can go lower. Like the possibility of coming down to even double bottom potentially at this 107-ish level, like the very low 100s, not impossible. Is it likely? I don't think it is likely personally. But man, it's not impossible. It's truly not impossible. So just take that into account. We're still in a downtrend. These red bands are still haunting us essentially, right? But as you can see, as I zoom out, let's zoom out right here, right? You can see the volume profile as the level that we're entering right now. We are entering a bit of a volume spike here, right? As we broke these levels here, we melted right through this lower volume, and now we're right at a major volume, which is pretty much this kind of mid to high 160s, which is why I expected a bounce. I do expect a bounce from here. If we start losing the 160s, the next levels to be is the very low 160s to the potentially even mid to high 150s, where the volume increases once again. But again, if we start losing these levels though, and if we especially lose the 150s, there's not a lot holding the stock up from potentially crashing down substantially even from there, which Sounds impossible, but there is a possibility. Now, I know a lot of people are eyeballing this level right here. A lot of people are eyeballing this gap fill right over here, right? Which I'll put a line there for now just to keep track of it. But this gap fill right here, pretty much at 144. A lot of people are eyeballing it. A lot of people are expecting this gap fill. A lot of people are waiting for this gap fill. And usually the way it works when these gap fills are so obvious and so many people are anticipating it, one of two things happen, in my experience at least, from what I've seen. One of two things happens. Option one, which is the bullish one. As we're getting closer and closer to the gap fill, let's say we get to the 150s roughly, people are going to be expecting the gap to fill at 144 and everyone's going to be like, yeah, I'll buy the gap fill. Usually, what'll happen is you'll come fairly close to filling the gap. Like I said, maybe around 150, maybe a little bit lower, but you get kind of close to filling that gap, right? Which to me, a gap fill is essentially coming down exactly to where this candle closed, which is pretty much around 144. That to me is a gap fill. But we come fairly close to it, right? It's almost like a tease, if that makes sense. But it bounces early. It bounces early, and a lot of people start getting FOMO thinking, okay, well, what if it doesn't go there? I mean, this is close enough, right? I'm just going to buy. Fuck it. I'll just buy, right? People get that kind of FOMO, if you will, right? And the market kind of teases you on that gap fill. That's option one. And sometimes, yeah, that's all that happens, and it just skyrockets from there. Option two is literally the opposite. As everyone's waiting for this gap fill, it just flushes right past it. And as everyone buys it, it just says, yeah, you know what? Screw that. And it just flushes down even further. Usually one of those two things happen. It's pretty rare that we just perfectly come up to this gap fill 144, get a perfect touch, perfect gap fill, perfect bounce. Everyone buys, everyone's happy. That rarely happens. At least I don't see it happen very often. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I wouldn't bet on that is what I'm trying to say. So we'll see how that plays out. But just keep that in mind. I see a lot of people eyeballing this gap fill. I think one of those two things will happen. Either we get close but not to it and then bounce early, or we flush right past it. And a lot of people are now holding the bag once again. So we'll see. Just, FYI, that's kind of what I'm seeing right now overall. But again, it's not completely unheard of to, potentially see something to, potentially even going as low as this 100s level once again. Because, yeah, Tesla's... It's not looking good. I'm not gonna lie. It's not looking good. I think the absolute worst case scenario, like literally worst case scenario, that's still probability. I give it like at max 10% chance, if not lower, maybe 5% chance, is coming down to about this $65 to $69 everyone's memeing about, which is going to be a retest of this area down over here. Will it actually happen? I have no idea. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But this to me would be the literal worst case scenario. Market crashes. Tesla just continues following the market as it crashes because it clearly didn't follow it to, running to all-time highs. And this would be literally the worst case scenario. I wouldn't hold my breath for it. I wouldn't wait for it. I wouldn't even expect it. But I would still have it slightly at the back of my mind just in case, because it's not impossible and it's not a 0% chance. So anyway, that's kind of what I see there. Options flow for Tesla overall. Some bulls did come in towards the end of the day, potentially going for a short-term bounce play, but overall pretty mixed. I mean, a lot of bearish flow in the morning, right? Rightfully so, because we did melt down pretty aggressively. A lot of bearish flow, but for the most part, nothing too crazy one way or the other than the fact that some bulls are trying to step in towards the end of the day, maybe look for a quick bounce back up to 175. That's not impossible. I do think that can happen potentially even by Friday or early next week. But I don't expect it to go much higher than that. And I do expect it to most likely reject the 175. And I do expect most likely to make even another lower low, go down a bit more. And the one thing I'm personally waiting on that I expect to see at some point, whenever, I don't know when, but at some point, is essentially a massive capitulation candle. And once I see those, that's when I'll be a little bit more excited to be a buyer. Right now, I'm just selling cash secured puts. If they force me to buy some shares, I'll buy some shares. But at the moment, I don't have a lot of shares of Tesla. I'm just watching it slowly melt down, slowly selling cash secured puts. I'm not really rushing into it. I already took some L's. I'm not going to lie. I absolutely took some L's on Tesla. I sold all the way up here and I bought too early on this drop, and I ended up taking some L's there. Some pretty painful L's. I'm not going to lie, but I did exit close to the 180s. And right now, I'm kind of waiting. I'm just kind of waiting, just letting it decide what it wants to do, where it wants to bounce, or if I see a massive capitulation candle, that's going to be another positive thing for me to want to start, being a bit more aggressive in terms of how I want to buy. But otherwise, I'm not in a rush. I am not in a rush here. But again, if my cash secured puts force me to buy shares pretty much within this channel, which is where they are at right now, I will buy some shares, no problem. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing. So let me know what you think down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.